And welcome to Feelings Matter, brought to you by Mindful Appy. I'm Michelle Stinson Ross.
And I'm Tina Schweiger.
And we have a special guest today. We have Upasna Gautam, and she is the product manager at CNN. She is also a mindfulness and meditation teacher, and she is a speaker coach at Science. I am getting so tongue-tied. She is a speaker coach at Shine Bootcamp. Welcome, Upasna.
Thank you both so much for having me. So happy to be here.
So I invited Upasna to join us. This is, surprise, surprise, going to be the final episode of season 1 of Feelings Matter. And I wanted Upasna to be a part of this conversation at this moment because she has been opening up and talking about communication, about mindfulness, about exceeding expectations or sometimes maybe ignoring them, all kinds of things around how to be more successful in the workplace and also how to be successful in the hybrid workplace that we seem to be finding ourselves now living in. And I think that's kind of where I want to start, if that's okay, ladies, is discussing what remote work looks like, what hybrid work looks like as we're beginning to come out of the pandemic.
Sounds great.
Yeah, sounds awesome.
Do you want to jump in first?
I would also, yes, absolutely. And Michelle, you said, talking about what success looks like in those capacities. And that's something I've thought about a lot personally and professionally over the past year, particularly during the pandemic. And, I think our definitions and views of success change over time and with experience and, of course, with age. And for all intents and purposes of this conversation, to me, it's really about creating opportunities so that you can live a life that you don't feel like you need to escape from. And that just transformed a lot from like when I was in my 20s to like my late 20s to my early 30s even. And, and I think you have to kind of get clarity around what that means for you at different points of your journey. And now I'm very grateful to be in this place of like privilege that, and opportunity where I want to be able to expand on the opportunity itself and places to grow. And for me, that means to help other people at this point in my life. The success for me no longer is associated to title and reaching a certain level in a hierarchy. I did have those goals before and I knew I wanted to get there. But the reason why I wanted to get there is so that I could ultimately get to this point of being able to live my life in a way that is fulfilling to me, but also gives back to others as well. So I really wanted to clarify that because everyone does have their own definition and each one is totally fine given where you are. But that also helps to speak to, I think, the rest of this conversation. So I wanted to throw that out there.
Fantastic. So life in the hybrid workplace. What has that been like for you over the last year and a half?
Oh my gosh, it has changed. First of all, the past year and a half feels like a lifetime in and of itself. Oh my goodness. I started working remotely pre-pandemic. So when I joined CNN, I was hired full-time to work remotely. All my team is in New York and Atlanta. And our tech teams, though, have become increasingly distributed, which is great. With that being said, I was just kind of getting into the groove of figuring out my remote work lifestyle and routine. And then after a few months of that, I actually was out hiking and I suffered from a really traumatic injury where I broke my arm, both bones in it. I had to have 2 surgeries and I also contracted an infection because of the first surgery, which was like near sepsis. And I had to like infuse antibodies into myself for 6 weeks, 3 times a day. Like it was I was a mess. Also in the middle of the pandemic. And so
I was going to say, were you even just afraid to be at the hospital?
at that time, when I first went for I broke my arm in March, in early March of 2020. So that was just when everything started to shut down. Hospitals were open at that time. I'm pretty sure that I contracted COVID during that time, but I had so much other pain that it was just completely disguised. Like, like the pain of a broken arm and all of that totally took over whatever pain I had from COVID. But I didn't even have like COVID tests or anything at that point because everything had just started to get really real in the United States. When I went back for my second surgery that I had to get because they found an infection, I had to have all my hardware removed. So that was about March. That was April, May. Then it was like there was more protocol around like testing and like very strict rules around like letting people in and out of the hospital, no visitors, except for X amount of time. And so yeah, like going through all of that, starting a new job, it was rough. And so I felt like I was trying to figure it out, and then I got totally derailed. And then it was kind of a blessing in disguise when I look back at it now for two reasons. One is that all of my coworkers that I was working with remotely, they all had to come home too. So we were kind of in the same boat together, suffering in some sense of the word together. Some people more than others or in different capacities, but everyone felt suffering. Everyone has felt it in the past year of remote working due to the pandemic. And then also the second reason why I think it was a blessing in disguise is because it forced me to stay home and rest and recover and heal. Because nothing was open. I couldn't do anything. I was pretty much bedridden. I couldn't do anything with my arm. It took a lot out of me just to even sit at my desk for like 30 or 40 minutes because I was on so many drugs and so many antibiotics. So, I think it was a blessing in disguise that it forced me to prioritize my mental and my physical health. So now coming out the other side of it, several months later, almost a year later, just like I was just telling you, Michelle, I feel like I'm relearning and maybe reimagining what works best for me in this remote work world. Because for me, it'll be a permanent, situation with travel here and there. So I don't even think I'm nearing like hybrid. I think, hybrid is truly like you're going to be regularly going into the office a couple of times a week. So I still qualify myself, even with some, quarterly and monthly travel. I'm full-time remote, but refiguring out what that means to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm redefining what remote looks like for me too. So for about the last 6 months, I have been renting an office space as well because my apartment was so tiny. I was like in 400 square feet. That's it. 400 square feet.
Yeah.
And I needed the psychological separation between work and home, which in that tiny space, I was just not able to create. So for about 6 months, I had been renting an office space, which was a godsend. It was really nice to walk out my door, take a short, like 10-minute walk to where my office space was, bring my mind into being present at work. And then when work was done, being able to take that walk again and be present at home in my downtime. So that's been really nice. But now that conferences are opening back up, I'm looking at like travel the same way you're looking at it, that I'm like, why am I spending money on an office space when I'm probably not even going to be in town to use it?
Totally.
So, full-time remote for me as well, but definitely continuing to rethink it. And I'm beginning to embrace the fact that a little fluidity is not actually a bad thing.
I love that. Amen to that. Yes.
I know there's times when Michelle and I work together and we're like, I think you need to take a nap.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think also with like what that point you just made about the fluidity, Michelle, that's one thing I have taken away from the past, 15, 16 months too, is rigid structures are not going to set you up for success. Like they will disappoint you. They will make you feel like you're failing, and creating flexible structures or routines, or not even routines, just frameworks for your life, I think are a much better option as as opposed to here are all of the things I have to do at this time in this place every single day. Like I quickly learned over, the course of the pandemic, and because of a lot of, things not working out / failure / learning, that confining yourself to like parameters is not, I really believe it's like counterproductive, just to be quite frank.
That actually sparks a question in my mind, and I want to give it to both of you to ponder for just a moment.
Yeah.
Because Tina and I have been talking quite a bit about emotional resilience, and you saying that about structure, and really rigid structure in particular, makes me think about emotional resilience and our resistance to change. And that if we can be less resistant to change, that we're more able to embrace it, then do you think that that also helps us cultivate that emotional resilience that we need to get through things? Do those two things kind of go hand in hand for you guys? And Tina's smiling. Tina, do you want to take this on first?
I think about this a lot, and I think the reason I'm so excited to talk to you, Upasna, just because I don't think you can have emotional resilience without mindfulness. I think if you're unaware, then you just react. And in order to get into a place of presence and to actually become resilient, you actually have to come to terms with what's actually happening and do so in a way that is non-judgmental. And that takes a lot of practice. It's easier said than done. What do you think?
Oh my God, that was so beautiful. Absolutely. I had to reimagine even, I've been practicing mindfulness and meditation for the last 10 years, and the last year and a half, again, completely different take and look on it. And it is to me, self-awareness is synonymous with mindfulness. It is this moment, and the word non-judgmental is so important because you're just an observer of your thoughts. You're an observer of, what is happening before you. But the thing is, and I think this maybe gets missed, or maybe people misinterpret it, and I know I used to too, is that it doesn't mean indifference. It is actually the opposite of that. It is that you are so clear and so self-aware that you feel so deeply about what is happening and what you're feeling. Then that allows you, because you have such a deep understanding of that, you don't need to react because you've thought about it and you've gained clarity on it. And the non-judgmental part comes as a result of reacting. That judgment is the byproduct of reacting to something that is occurring. And I think one thing that I've thought about a lot more and put into practice a lot more intentionally over the past year and a half is when we think of mindfulness, I think a lot of us immediately conjure up an image in our head of meditating on a cushion and being so zen. Like, that is one abstract illustration of it. But what it actually is your day-to-day activities. It is in the mundane. That is the key takeaway for me out of 2020, is that mindfulness is in the mundane. If you can achieve it there, then you have pretty much achieved it as a human being. What are you doing when you're brushing your teeth? Are you thinking about what all of the shit you got to do for the rest of the day? Or are you fully present and enjoying the experience of brushing your teeth? And taking your time to oh, yes, this is, and you don't have to be so flowery about it either, right? It's not like you have to make it all woo-woo and turn it into some metaphysical experience. It doesn't have to be that way either. But if you want to, that's cool too. But just being there and enjoying that for what it is. I get to clean my teeth right now with this toothpaste and this toothbrush, and then I'm going to be done with that. And it was great. And now I can move on to whatever is next.
I have that. Yes, that's so wonderful. It sparks up a couple follow-up questions for me. One, I just really noticed that you mentioned non-judgmental, people mistake it as indifference. And I could see that. And I think I'm going to start paying attention to, is that an assumption that some people have, that non-judgmental equals indifference? So that was a really good one. And then secondly, mindfulness is being present. And there's something about mindfulness that a lot of it is talked about enjoying things, but often I find the most challenging mindfulness is in the unpleasantness, like being mindful during grief, being mindful during an interpersonal argument or a conflict. Like for me, that type of mindfulness it really presses the boundaries and challenges you to try to really to stay present. And then even to the point where if in our family, we've talked about this a lot. We have this thing called the lizard brain, which is, our limbic and amygdala system. When it gets hijacked and we get a little bit crazy, fight, flight, or freeze mode, our practice is to stop and say, I think I'm getting in my lizard brain, and to give somebody around you a heads up that I don't know if I can take it anymore. I think I'm just going to go off the rails.
Yep.
Before it happens. I mean, what's your take on mindfulness when it comes to the negative side of things, and how does that work for you?
It's because of those. I also I think I still say negative emotions, but I don't want to qualify them as negative either, because they're emotions, but it really came from, going through the injury, working through the pandemic. And also there was a lot of traumatic stuff happening in the world, in our country over that time. And let me tell you, working at CNN during that time was not easy either. You are inundated subconsciously and consciously with news all day long. And the reason why I brought that up is because one of my mentees, she had messaged, I had posted on my Instagram story about I don't even remember which event it was because there were so many, but I had posted about how I'm taking a break for a couple days. It's been a really rough week. I'm so overwhelmed. I was just, there's lots of crying and frustration and just I was so overwhelmed. I thought I was going to explode from, and it's part of it is part of the job, but also you have to learning to deal with it in a very different capacity. I don't have my coworkers with me to commiserate, right? I'm at home, we're all at home by ourselves doing this and figuring it out. And so one of my mentees had messaged me saying how do you deal with all this stress? You're so how do you stay so calm? And how do you not let it bother you? And I was like, whoa, hold on. It bothers me so much. It debilitates me because I feel so much, but I let it, and I need it to, because I'm not that type of person that can let, read a traumatic headline come through or an article come through and ignore it or be indifferent towards it. I have a lot of feelings, and especially practicing meditation and mindfulness over the course of a long time is going to make you even more it's like a double-edged sword, right? You feel so much, but the thing is that you have to learn to do in tandem with that is create boundaries and protect your energy. So that's kind of, I think, what there are some gray lines there, right? When you think of mindfulness as everything's happy, everything's pleasant. Absolutely not. I also learned how to, I'm still learning how to create fierce boundaries to protect my energy more than anything, where I'm okay, I'm not looking at work and news. Those two are synonymous for me. So I'm not looking at it today. I took email off my phone since working from home because I'm grateful and blessed to have an office. I know I come here to do work, and when I leave, I'm done. It became for me too much to have it in my space and in my, like physical and mental space all the time. So I try to, build like disconnections into my life. But going back to what you said, Tina, I think it manifests even more in those feelings of struggle and misery and sadness and difficult emotions. And the thing is like when you do practice mindfulness over time, it becomes all about how you ride those waves, right? I also have noticed myself like when something amazing happens, it's funny, like I when my fiance and I were first like together, something great would happen. I'd be like, oh, I'm like super, super excited. I just like don't it just because I'm not like like just bouncing off the walls. Like I'm telling you, I'm so happy about this, right? But also to me, that's why happiness is never the goal because it's a fleeting emotion. Just like sadness is, just like pain is, just like stress is. They're all on the same spectrum. It's all an emotion, and mindfulness at least help you, like weather the storm or ride the waves. How
Surfing, like
yeah,
surfing, yeah.
it's surfing. And you become a really good surfer. Yes.
And I think I had a little epiphany while you were speaking, because when you say like when you practice mindfulness for a long time, and then it kind of brought me back to reacting. But the epiphany was when you do practice mindfulness, you sort of upend your coping mechanisms. So normally you learn when you're a child to you have trauma, and then you react and you learn how to cope with it in these very childlike ways. And then you carry some of those coping mechanisms into your adulthood. But when you do practice mindfulness for a long time, you're like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. And you start upending those.
I'm curious, Tina, like what kind of coping mechanism, because I think children are taught probably a lot across what that means or what it should mean. So I'm curious what you're referencing.
It could mean like, shutting down. Like if you can't, you're flooded emotionally because there's too much going on. It's too traumatic. You may shut down. My coping mechanism was always daydreaming. So I would find myself floating around in space and imagining these other scenarios to just escape and cope. And then after a lot of mindfulness practicing, you're working on like active listening, and you're paying attention to a speaker, and you're really taking in what they're saying. It's kind of hard to allow your mind to drift, and daydream at the same time. So those coping skills that you had, that some are healthy, some not so much, they do pop up and you're become more aware of them. And over the past year has to have brought some of that up. I mean, I can imagine with the arm break and the sepsis. I mean, that's frightening. Like that's brink of death frightening. Like you can die from that in a blip.
Yeah.
And like, what did that change? Like, what did that change for you? Did that alter your views on yourself, on your mortality, your purpose? What was the biggest takeaway from that?
Oh my God, I didn't think we'd be talking about that, but
I'm sorry, I might have rerouted it.
No, I love that. Two things in particular that I always like, that now that I feel, I feel like and see myself on the other side of it. One around my physical body. And I got to see firsthand the resilience of the human body come back. I thought, I was like, okay, I'm just not gonna have an arm again. Like, as long as I can get over this infection, cool, screw the arm. Like I can figure this out, right? Like it's all good. But like it all worked out. And it took a lot of, it took work to get there, and, taking help seriously and trusting doctors and all that stuff. But on top of that, I had a very different view of like health and wellness before this happened, which was I am working out and eating healthy because, I want my body to be strong and healthy so I can live a long time. And while that's still there to some capacity, what I actually am thinking now every time I do that is thank you so much for protecting me and like helping me and saving me. So this is the least I can do for you. Like, it's more of like that's how every time I go into a workout now, that's what I'm thinking. It's like, and I couldn't, like, I started with, I couldn't even lift anything, not even a toothbrush. So now that I'm like able to like go from like 5 pounds to 10 pounds to like slowly getting to like 12 in my left hand. Every time I do, I'm like, there is an immense expression, in my head and sometimes vocally to myself when I'm there, like, of gratitude.
That's
And
awesome.
like, I just have a complete different view on that for sure. And I think that has, manifested in a lot of positive ways mentally too.
Mm-hmm.
On the mortality topic, so much. Oh my goodness. Like, honestly, the TLDR is we're all going to die, and it might be right now, it might be tomorrow, it might be 40 years from now. Just do your thing. Like, I've always said that and thought that. I've been a pretty independent thinker. I was raised that way. But it took it went to a whole new level after going through that experience of like, I could literally just not be here tomorrow. Something could happen between now and then, and it could be over. So like, what am I holding, sharing? Why am I not helping? Why am I judging? And like, and who am I to say what is right or wrong or good or bad, right? Like, just it's so I don't it's so I'm still trying to figure out like how to articulate this very strong feeling and perspective based off of all of that experience. But this is I love that question that you asked because of that. Because I think
it feels like, yeah, there's like this duality of gratitude for the strength and resilience of your body,
yeah,
but at the same time, this acknowledgement and recognition of how fleeting and how, in a split second,
yeah,
it could be over. So I have a hard time. I struggle with that duality personally.
it is. And I think like, it's simple to articulate. It's simple to like read and hear and then like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it's not easy. And it took me definitely like like 3 traumatic, experiences in a row to start to get to that new level of thinking. But I think that's mindfulness over time too, right? Like,
Mhm.
different experiences based on how impactful they are to your life or what they mean in your life will help you peel back layers over time. Like, it's just another layer. And so I think that's different for everybody. And, it doesn't get, it's not like it gets easier to be mindful. It's a lifelong work in progress. I teach it and like to talk about it because it reinforces it and helps me become better. That's why even whether it's speaking at conferences or having a conversation with friends or doing a podcast with you all, like, talking about the experience and what it means and how it manifests in different ways over time helps to reinforce a lot of that. And, teaching to me is also a form of learning. So I think that's really important to share.
Well, and I appreciate that you gave that context, because now that I have that piece of the puzzle, what I've been seeing you doing, particularly on Instagram, just there's a whole nother layer to that. And one of the things in particular that I wanted to ask you about was the mindful communication tips that you've been sharing. And particularly, I loved the video, and it's been probably a couple of months now, that you're talking about asking, how are you? And why you should consider asking other things than just how are you. The communication tips have been really mind-opening for me.
I'm so glad to hear that. Everything that I share in that forum or in that vein is because it's something I have observed or learned or am putting into practice myself. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to share what I'm doing and maybe it'll help someone else too. But that one in particular, I had thought about so much over the course of working from home during the pandemic. at CNN during an extremely traumatic time in our country's history. So we are, as product managers, as particularly, but everyone, working from home means meetings all the time. That's your only
Mhm.
form of communication, or it's Slack and email, right? It's all virtual. So like, okay, work is work. And I know there's a lot of boundary blending that had to happen out of just circumstances because of what happened with the pandemic and coming home to work. But at the same time, the people we work with, like, you don't know what's going on behind the screen. Yes, they're your coworkers and you might be talking to that person every day in a meeting, but you just don't know what's going on behind the screen. There's so much shit going on in the world, so many different events that affect people differently, especially from underrepresented communities of color, women of color. Like there's just so much stuff. And there were points in time when I was asked that question and I got really annoyed. But then I was like, no, because I didn't want to talk about it. And I'm like, what? So do you want me to lie and say I am about to have a breakdown? Because that's what I actually feel like. But I internalized it and I was like, okay, wait. I bet there's other people feeling like this too. And of course there were, and I reached out to coworkers and we commiserated over this, topic as well of like, how are you feeling about everything that's going on, working from home, being inundated with news all day long? And I came to realize, there is some boundary setting that can occur to make this a little more comfortable and respectful, which is going into meetings, especially, right? Having like setting up one on one conversations with people you care about. Talk about how you're doing in that situation. In a meeting with, several people where the motive and the goal of the meeting is not to build a relationship and you have actual items that you need to get done, just get the shit done. You don't need to small talk during a meeting. People have like, give people 5-10 minutes back, get the information you need, call it, move on. You want to talk and build a relationship and see how somebody's doing, you can set up a different time to do that. And I started doing that, and I noticed other coworkers doing that as well, where it's like you actually care about coworkers and you become friends with them, and you over time care about their well-being. An open forum meeting with other people is not the time or place to talk about that. It also takes away from the original goal of the meeting. And so as a product manager too, is this like true product management mindset of like establishing goal, like what problem are we trying to solve? And that starts even at the level of a meeting where it's like, why are we here? What is this for? What are we trying to do? And so, I started to encourage people to separate that out, right? Especially at work, where it's like, have the conversations and make them meaningful as opposed to trying to just fill in conversation during a time when people are going through a lot of shit. So that's kind of where it stemmed from. And then I started putting it into practice a little bit more and being mindful of like asking, not just, and just even before we started talking, Michelle, you were like, I'm going to use this time to actually catch up. Like, how are you doing? You know how different that phrase is received than, hey, how are you? Versus, hey, how are you doing today? Like, it's so like even those like tiny different changes in the way that we communicate resonate so differently and strongly with people, because it makes them feel like that you are talking to them as opposed to mindless chatter or just like a filler in a conversation.
I think we may be on the verge of some evolutions in workplace norms, if you will. In the workplace, when everybody's in the workplace, it is common to just have the time to chat and catch up personally. And it's completely absent in a fully remote or a hybrid workplace. You don't have that. And what I really love about your observation is I feel like that's an evolution that corporate culture needs to take in order to really thrive in the new environment. It's being more intentional about the meetings, but and I think particularly in the South, I've noticed a difference doing business with people in the South versus the North. Maybe there's different regions with different cultures. In the South, you're considered rude if you start a meeting, but you don't allow time for that small talk and connection. And even working together, it can feel that way. So I think in different areas where it's more common to have the small talk, just to stop and say, I care about you. I'll set up a time, later this week so we can catch up one-on-one. But right now we're just going to go ahead and plow through this and we're going to finish in 35 minutes,
Exactly.
and really respecting that.
And you'll be, no one's going to respond negatively to that when you say it as beautifully as that, Tina, right? Like everyone, like people get it. Everyone's actually been in the same boat of being at home. And yes, I think like we have to make a different type of effort to seek that connection that we need, because there is this void that has been created that a lot of people are yearning to fill. But you can make it much more intentional, like you said, like I said, where it doesn't need to be done in haste. It doesn't need to be done in tandem with something else. It can be preserved in some sense as its own conversation, as its own experience, right?
It becomes more mindful and intentional.
Exactly.
And that does demand more self-awareness from everyone.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Love it.
I love this because this tilt in the conversation leads me to one of the other things I wanted to ask you about, which was expectations. So if we're sensing that there's a shift, a change in culture, in the way we expect to communicate with one another, what other expectations do we need to maybe take another look at?
Do you mean like in the workplace, Michelle?
Yeah, or even just culturally. I know one of the posts that I saw from you about expectations was particularly for us, because the three of us on this call all identify as female, that there are expectations about what we will achieve, how we will achieve it, how we will comport ourselves while achieving it. And it gets tiresome after a while. And I've seen a couple of posts from you that are communicating that same thing. It's like, wait a second, why am I even trying to mold myself to somebody else's expectations of who I should be and how I should behave?
I totally agree. And I have learned, like, I was kind of in that phase, or in that part of my own journey, where I was conforming and like trying to be a certain way because I thought that's what you had to do to achieve XYZ. Again, this is also when I had a different definition of success. And as I've learned over time, I think about this a lot. I've been thinking about it so much in the past couple of months, especially. One of my favorite examples, and I actually just posted about it today, I've been thinking about it for a while, is there's all this conversation about women self-editing in the workplace and in their communication. And one of the things I think we've all seen all over the place is stop apologizing so much, right? And I know why you're both smiling and laughing. Yeah. So, and there's a lot to unpack there. There is so much, but why is it that we're putting it on women to make the changes and do the self-editing about what we're saying and doing, and the way that we're behaving, but especially about what we're saying, right? And like, being on this, a conference speaker, a speaker coach, and talking about mindfulness, like I try to be extremely intentional when I share, especially publicly, about anything about communication and mindfulness, or anything in general. Like I think so deeply about everything I share to make sure that it's going to bring value, and that I'm doing a succinct job of explaining why. And the one thing that I've shared myself is like, so don't apologize for XYZ, and here's something else you can say. But now I'm at this point where I'm like, wait, why? What is wrong with apologizing? But here's the thing. So there's duality to this too.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've realized when you become more mindful and you practice mindfulness over time, you become very aware of the words that you use. So you kind of by default stop mindlessly apologizing, right? Whereas I think like a lot of women do have that kind of set as their innate default setting to apologize. But I think there is a middle ground there, right? Like, yes, practice mindfulness, practice public speaking, become a better communicator so that you understand why you're apologizing.
Mm-hmm.
But also, hold up, there's a whole other segment of the population here that we're not talking about, which is men. And what about their communication and why not they or why they apologize or why they don't? And I was reading this article that was in the New York Times. It was an article from 2019 that I was reading that also kind of inspired me to talk about this a little bit more. There was a study done, and one of the psychiatrists had a quote in the article. It said, "Men find less reason to apologize because they don't think they're doing things wrong, and so they don't apologize." I'm like, okay, there's nothing wrong with that either. But at the same time, that warrants some emphasis of mindfulness and self-awareness as well. Both are needed in these two very different segments, right? And I think that there is a middle ground there, but the emphasis has just been on this universal rule that has been spread now that women apologize too much, stop apologizing so much. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, maybe men aren't apologizing enough. So where like what's missing here? And I do think that self-awareness and mindfulness is really missing there because, why are you saying it? It's okay to be sorry. If you're actually late, yeah, you should apologize. Absolutely. Don't be an asshole. Like, say sorry and move on. But, or even like if you had something due and it's late, you should apologize and
Mm-hmm.
and it just is respectful and it shows that you care. It's an expression of empathy, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. So that one in particular, like that has just been on my mind nonstop, Michelle.
I
When
think
you just said that.
I think there's how there's a behavior pattern, unconscious behavior of laughing, like you kind of just like laugh at everything. It's almost like a coping for insecurity or something. I think that I'm sorry or sorry can fall in that category. I don't really know. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. There's probably some studies out there that could show it, but and then that does circle back around to the practicing of mindfulness and self-awareness can make you more aware of the fact that you are either maybe it's laughing unconsciously or apologizing unconsciously, and you could just like, it's that decision to just stop, just peace, just quiet. There's say things when you need to say them, say things intentionally in service to others and in value to others, but not just, letting it all flutter out of you.
I love that. Absolutely.
Well, and all of this stems from that expectation that women don't deserve to be there or any number of things. I'm just like, it's so funny how often I run into women who suffer from imposter syndrome and not so much guys. Well, is that because society keeps trying to recondition us to go, wait a minute, you're a woman, you don't really deserve to be here.
No,
And then we
think
keep
guys have it
internalizing those ideas.
Yeah, no, I think they have it just as much. I just think they're conditioned not to admit it.
I think that could be part of, yeah, probably all of the above. And also, I like learning more and more about different ways imposter syndrome, as we have known it to be coined. I don't like that it's just like this blanket diagnosis across so many different types of women who are experiencing it for different reasons. Talking to a black woman, a black woman who is the only engineer on her team, is a very different experience of imposter syndrome than it is for me or for you or for you, right? Like, it's not that is it is not a, like I said, a blanket diagnosis that can just be made. And instead, I feel like it's taking away from understanding what the problems are that exist in the structure and just saying, go be more confident. Like, that is not, first of all, that is an inaccurate diagnosis, a horrible remedy. Like, no, that's not the problem.
Yeah, I think there's this process of like accepting your like insecurity, like not judging it, seeing it, and then, not letting it control you.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily equate to I'm more confident. It may build into more confidence over time, but oh my goodness.
and in this conversation, I mean, this is one, and then sometimes it's tied into conversations of like, inclusion and equity, and that's like a whole different conversation. Like, there, like, when I think of imposter syndrome and what it might manifest for me is, I think it has the ability for some women in this whole subset that have been labeled as having imposter syndrome to be a positive thing, because again, you're self-aware, you know that you don't know, but you'll figure it out. And I think that's healthy, and I think that's totally fine. I don't like that it's called imposter syndrome. I don't feel like an imposter. I just am self-aware and I know what I don't know, and I'm very okay with that. And but that's the thing, my experience with it is not the same as a lot of other women who are actually struggling because of inequities. And like, that's where this gets like way too blurry. It's way too broad of a generalization to make or talk about in like these larger discussions, to say this is imposter syndrome. Like, it's way too multifaceted.
Yeah.
One more thing about expectations. So what I have been experiencing over the last several years, and it does tie into mindfulness, is stopping long enough to go, wait a second, is this something that I expect from myself? Is it something that I'm expecting from somebody else? And if I am, did I communicate it? Have they agreed to it? There's more than one part to just, well, that's how I expect everybody to behave. Says you, and why should you think that? But also in agreeing to expectations, right? It's like I can step back thanks to a mindfulness practice. I can kind of pause for a second, go, wait a second. Is this something I need from myself? Is this something that I believe in my heart that I need to accomplish? Or is this just something that somebody else external to me is expecting me to do? And do I really want to sign up for that? So just being able to unpack that an expectation is several things, and it actually constitutes an agreement there somewhere. And did I actually agree to behave that way is what's been on my mind for a long time now. And part of being respectful and mindful of others is, did I actually communicate that I need that from you? And did you agree to give it to me?
So profound, Michelle. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the idea of expectations, that, like you said, there's a lot to unpack there too, but it's even the ones that we have for ourselves. Sometimes I feel like we project onto others, and that's where what you just said becomes so important. Is like, wait a minute, am I projecting, or did I actually communicate what I needed? And there's also differences there too, right? Like the expectation of behavior. That is dangerous territory to play in, because you're like, well, why didn't that person do this thing that I thought they were going to do? Like, what was there? There is so much there. But the thing is, if we like focus, if we take a step back and look at expectation as not like expectation, and maybe as a form of communication to achieve XYZ, right? Okay, talk about it and talk about your needs, talk about what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to what seems like to be in a lot of even like personal relationship type of conversations. Why didn't the other person do that? I was expecting them to do it. What? We're not mind readers. I don't care how mindful you are, how smart you are. Like everyone processes and works differently. If like just say it, and there are and that's why I think mindful communication is so important, right? The way that we articulate our needs and wants and desires and our goals, every single word matters so much and makes a big difference because it will impact the way the other person receives it. And so I think that's where expectations start in a place of like, this was supposed to happen, or like, I thought this was going to happen. And it's past tense too, right? Which is like the antithesis of mindfulness and being self-aware.
Reacting.
It's exactly. It is reactionary. And there is, it's just projecting onto the other person. It is the opposite of being self-aware.
Do you want a really fun example of that with my kids on the weekend?
Yes.
So age 5, age 9 boys, fight. They, there's a hula hoop. There's only one hula hoop. There's 2 boys. So one boy has the hula hoop. The other boy comes up and snatches the hula hoop. The other boy doesn't want to let it go. And, now we have this tug of war with a soon to be broken hula hoop. And I walk up and I was like, look, I'm going to help you guys resolve this. I'm going to hold the hula hoop. I hold the hula hoop up in the air. And I was like, okay, who had the hula hoop first? And the older guy is like, I had the hula hoop first. And then the younger guy was like, but it's my hula hoop and I want it. I was like, well, did you ask for it? He's like, I did ask for it. And he said no. I'm like, well, he can say yes, no, or he can counter offer. So what I'm going to say is, instead of just a no, how about we do a counter offer? And I'll challenge the one who's here to, okay, well, I'll give it to you in 15 minutes. I'm like, no, it's kind of a little long for a 5-year-old. How about 5 minutes? He's like, okay, like I'll set a timer. Hula hoop is here. 5-minute timer is set. Counter offer is secured, and expectations are met.
That is a perfect exhibit of how expectations and communication go hand in hand. I, on a very different and equally relevant example, is when I mentor a lot of women who are looking to move into product management or tech. They have a lot of questions around salary negotiation. And a lot of it is they go in with assumptions and or expectations, which I think also get pretty hazy there too. And the reason why they like either move into the position and settle for something that they don't want, which leads to misery and disappointment ultimately, or they don't know that if they just communicate what they need, that you can get what you want, as opposed to just assuming that this is an expectation. I expect to get this much money, or I expect to get this compensation package. And it's, and then when you learn the art of negotiation as a part of it, and which is communication, you end up becoming like more aware of, first of all, your needs, because it requires you to be very clear about what you're asking for, right? Like you can't go into those conversations sounding like, well, maybe this would be nice, because then you're also not going to get that. It needs to be an assertive conversation. And again, that eliminates assumptions and expectations. But I think that example you just gave, Tina, like is a great illustration of how there's so many exhibits of that one example that you just gave, mostly in adults.
Yeah, we just don't grow up.
which is okay to some extent, for sure. But
oh man, this has been so good talking with you today. I know we may be breaking this into 2 final season finales, I imagine.
Awesome.
But man, what a treat. What an amazing treat. It's, women in tech, we're a rare breed. So it's good to get together and talk.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. This was a lot of new questions, and it made me do some on the spot thinking, which was really great too. So I love these very candid conversations. Just, hopefully we share our experiences to make other people's lives a little bit easier and maybe help them learn from some of our, learnings and mistakes and experiences. So thank you both very much for doing this.
Thank you.
So as we wrap up, Upasna, what are some of the ways if somebody wants to, because you said you teach mindfulness, if they want to learn from you, or if they want coaching as a female speaker in tech, what are some ways that people can reach out to you and connect?
Yes. So for public speaking, I share lots of stuff on Twitter and Instagram. It's very easy to find me online, just at Upasna Gautam, my first and last name. I share.
There's the Instagram.
Thank you. Yes, and it's the same handle for Twitter. And so I share lots of resources across both of those platforms. As far as a more structured and professional training goes, I'm a speaker coach at Shine Bootcamp. They're a speaker accelerator for women and those who identify as women, and they do a couple of boot camps per year. You can check them out online. Also starting up a bunch of classes. They'll be starting up a bunch of classes if maybe, the full-blown becoming a public speaker isn't your thing. The skills you learn as you become a public speaker are still extremely important and relevant in your personal and professional life. So they've now opened up a new course that is strictly for communication skills without the end goal of like giving a conference presentation. So both are available. Check them out. I'll be coaching with them. And then again, like I share lots of stuff on my profiles. For mindfulness and meditation, I've been pretty much sticking to, over the course of the past year and a half, of sharing things on my profile, and I'm hoping to kick back up some shared like experiences and classes online. More to come on that. Trying to figure out a way to do it, both in person and offer things online. But if you're in Austin, definitely stay tuned. I'm going to be kicking that back up here shortly. And then if you are a woman looking to transition into product management, I do have one-on-one coaching available, and the link to sign up for that for those sessions are in my social profiles as well. So I think that covers it. Find me online and DM me, and we'll figure it out.
I love it. I love it.
Thank you both so much.
So great.
Thank you as well.